Don't treat your game like it's a baby. It's not a baby. It's a game. And it will go away. Pinstripe is done. I finished that game. It's been launched. I don't care about that game. Hey guys, how you feeling today? Are you feeling cozy? Are you feeling beautiful? Good. Let's get started. My name's Thomas Brush. I'm the creator of a game called Pinstripe. I'm also working on a game called Once Upon a Coma. I've been making games for about 10 years now, and I love what I do, but there's plenty of mistakes. I could do a whole series on just mistakes I've made in the game industry. So here are 5 mistakes, in fact 5 more mistakes if you've watched my previous video. Mistakes I've made in the indie game industry, specifically as a rookie when I first started out. Alright, so let's get started. The first one is I focused too much on the short term. Believe it or not, when you first start making games, it's really hard to focus on the long term, and some of you probably know this feeling. It's hard to make that next step, even work on your game the next day or the next week and continue on month after month, and maybe even year after year. So all you're thinking about is short term. How do I get stuff done now, as opposed to ensuring that you can continue to get stuff done efficiently year after year. Some of you don't realize this, but that game you're working on right now, if you stick with it, it's going to take you a couple years to finish. So right now, figure out ways that you can be more efficient and effective in the long term. So some simple ways to think about effectiveness in the long term is, what kind of code are you writing right now? Is your code sort of haphazardly? Is that how you say it? Haphazardly? Are you just slamming down code as quick as you can because you got to go to dinner, you've got to go to bed, and you've got to finish your game, and you only have an hour to work on it tonight? Is that what you're doing? Well, that's not really a good way to do it, because if you're going to be making games in the long term, you're going to have to go and fix that code later. It's not a good idea to duct tape your game together, because it's going to collapse multiple times in the long term. So think about the code that you're writing. Think about how you're layering your artwork, maybe in Photoshop or in Blender. Are you naming things intuitively? Are you being strategic with how you're putting your project together? You really want to ensure that when you look at your game a year from now, you're not going to become psychotic by looking at the stuff you've made, right? You want to make sure you can deal with it, that it's okay, because no matter how perfect you are and how efficient and effective you are, you're always going to look back on your project and realize things you could have done differently. But don't be like me. Don't look back a year later and be miserable dealing with the crap you put together because you were impatient and you weren't focused on the long term. All right, the second mistake I made as an indie game developer is I was frantic. I was constantly frantic like a freaking squirrel. Every little thing that I could think of, I wanted to put in my game. It was disgustingly, what's the word? It was hard. It was hard. What about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? Be a little bit more strategic with the content you're adding into your game. A good rule of thumb when you feel like you're maybe being a little bit too frantic is, how long has this idea been in my head? If you're like me, an idea will pop in my head and I'll feel like I have to add it to my game or I won't be able to get to sleep at night. So I'll go in, I'll delete stuff that I already worked on for 2 weeks that I was strategic about creating, and I'll just make a change. And I'll change everything, and then I'll wake up the next morning and be like, why did I do that? So don't be frantic with your ideas. Your ideas are great, so don't ignore your ideas. You just don't have to put them in your game immediately, right? Like, write them down or record them or set a reminder on your phone to think about that idea the next day. You don't have to immediately put it in your game. This certainly comes back to that first point of focusing on the long term. When you're frantic, you're really focused on the short term, getting that instant gratification of making a change, right? So playing God, making games, it really feels good. You do get a rush. It's almost like playing the lottery or something and gambling. You have an idea and you think, will this stick? And you throw it at your game and you hope that it feels good and you hope that it makes your game better. And when it does rarely make your game better, these frantic ideas you have, when they do work, it's exciting and you get addicted and you want to do it again. And I just want to say, it's not really a sustainable way to make games. Don't be frantic, don't be changing stuff constantly. Be strategic about your changes. Again, your ideas are good. Any idea can be a really great idea. But instead of destroying stuff you've spent time on, write it down, think about it, sleep on it, and see how it works in the long run. So the third mistake is a lack of focus. This is a really interesting idea, and I was sort of thinking about it on the way to my studio today. I really had a hard time when I was an indie game developer focusing on specific things that would make my game better. I kind of just threw all sorts of ideas together and just threw them into my game and would hope that they would work. So I would do some music here, write some music. I was like, I really like that song I wrote, so I'm gonna try and figure out how to make the artwork work with that song. And so I would have one thing, one piece of artwork or one function of the game leading another function, and I didn't really have an idea or a roadmap for the game. Now, for Once Upon a Coma, there is a roadmap, and it's written out very specifically. Obviously, we've deviated from that occasionally, but for the most part, we're following a roadmap. We are limiting ourselves. And again, all these things are kind of tied together into being impatient. When you first start making a game, you're impatient, and that causes you to have a lack of focus. It's really difficult for you to understand that if you can focus on something for 2 or 3 weeks, those are the ideas you should be able to be implementing into your game. If you can't focus on something for more than a day, it's not worth putting into your game. So try and be focused, put together a roadmap, just a paragraph or even maybe a 3-page document of what the game includes, the functionality of the game, what's the story, how are things laid out in the game, what's the artwork look like, how does it feel, what's the setting, what are the characters, how long do you want the game to be playable, what's your target audience. Focus on this stuff. And it's really difficult to do this, I get that, when you're working maybe 2 hours a day on your game as opposed to full time. I'm lucky enough that I'm working full time, so I don't feel guilty spending 3 hours of my day just working on a roadmap. But when you have 2 hours of time, valuable time to work on your game, I understand that it feels really challenging to go and spend that 2 hours, that precious 2 hours of time that you have during the day to put together a Word document. But trust me, it's worth it in the long run. All right, the fourth mistake I made as an indie game developer is I overvalued my game. Now this is an interesting one. Some of you right now, it's kind of a badge of honor to call your game your baby, right? You see this a lot on Facebook groups for like indie game developers about your indie game being your baby and this thing you've put your heart and soul into, and you're basically overvaluing your game so much so that you're calling it an infant human being. So I have a baby. I have an infant daughter. Well, she's 1 now. And I have felt that way about my games. That's messed up, but I have felt that way about my games. Not anymore, but when I first started making games, when I was working on Pinstripe, I had a weird affection for my game. So much so that it would cause me distress and depression and anxiety. Part of the overvaluing of your game, treating it like a baby, most of that actually will lead to anxiety and depression. And the reason why you are overvaluing it is perhaps plenty of good reasons about your dreams and aspirations and who you want to be. Like, I love that stuff. I love becoming the best version of yourself. But when you obsess about your future, especially the financial future, you start to kind of worship what you're working on. A lot of moms worship their children, and their children are everything. And if their children disappoint them, they're bedridden, right? Lots of parents feel this way. Don't be that way with your game. Don't be that way with anything, really, but especially don't be that way with your game, because the market is so unpredictable. Now, all that aside, I want to tell you the reason why you should not treat your game like it's your baby. The reason why is because obviously it causes anxiety and depression, and it's difficult taking the next step when you're constantly obsessed with your game. But the ultimate reason why you should not do this is it's difficult to be creative. It's difficult to be yourself. It's difficult to be the best creative version of yourself when you're obsessed with something. When you're obsessed and depressed and anxious about your game, it's difficult taking that next step and being creative. I think creativity and being courageous are like one and the same. So if you can't be courageous, you're not going to be creative. Being creative takes a lot of guts. It takes a lot of bravery. So when you are overvaluing your game, when you're treating it like a human being, it's going to be very difficult for you to be honest and tell the truth with your game, right? Some of the best advice I've ever been given about storytelling, for example, in my games is to be honest, to tell the truth. It's very difficult for you to tell the truth when you're obsessed, when you're anxious and depressed. Don't treat your game like it's a baby. It's not a baby, it's a game, and it will go away. Pinstripe is done. I finished that game. It's been launched. I don't care about that game. I don't care if people critique it, crap all over it. It doesn't matter to me. It's done. And so my next game, Once Upon a Coma, I'm treating it like that. I'm basically seeing into the future knowing that I won't care about it. I won't care about it as much as I do now, so it's not a big deal. And I'm actually profiting from that. I'm much more creative. Life is good, and I'm having fun. All right, the fifth way. All right, the fifth reason. What am I trying to say? Guys, what is this video about? The fifth mistake I made as an indie game developer was I was a purist. Now, this wasn't necessarily true towards the end of Pinstripe's development, which Pinstripe was my first commercial release. Wasn't really true towards the end of it, but the beginning of it, yes, absolutely. I cared so much about doing everything myself, making proprietary systems, really focusing on, I'm not going to use plugins, or I'm not going to use assets from the asset store on Unity. I'm going to build it all on my own because that's what you're supposed to do, right? That's what a game developer is, right? They build everything from scratch. They're not going to use other people's artwork because you're not an artist if you're using other people's art or code or plugins or whatever. That's bull. It's just not true. Every artist, every creator is going to utilize tools available to him. The cool thing about living in today's modern technological era is that there are so many amazing tools available to you inside of Unity itself. So don't be a purist. Now, here's the thing. If you're really talented at something specific, so for example, if you're really good at code and you're really good at building maybe a physics-based system or something like that, go for it. You know, be a purist about it. Build a proprietary physics system, but make sure it shines and outshines any other plugins or systems that have been pre-built that most other developers are using out of the box. Or if you're a really good artist, for example, be a purist about your art. So I feel like I'm gifted in artwork, so I'm going to be a purist about my artwork. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm going to focus on it, be a perfectionist about it, because that's where I shine, and I can actually use that to my advantage. Now, if you don't care about the commercial success of your game and maybe the viability of your business, then, you know, forget about what I'm saying about being a purist. If that's what you want to do, if that's who you want to be, that's totally fine. Go for it, man. But if you care about financial stability and sustainability and making a business that works long term, you can't be spending all of your time, because time is money. You can't be spending all of your time building proprietary systems. Like people like Notch and Bill Gates and these wildly successful people who built proprietary systems from scratch, those people are amazing, brilliant people. And I'm not saying you're not brilliant, but they are very lucky. And if that's your goal, if you want to be those people, go for it. Do it. But if you just want to make an indie game, don't be a purist. Just get started, make it happen, and lean on your talents. Alright guys, if you like this video, please subscribe and also hit the bell icon. I post bi-weekly videos, and I also do live streaming of me making games. I try and do that daily, and I love it. So hit subscribe, the bell icon, leave a comment, and I'll try and answer as best as I can. Alright guys, one final note. I offer mentorship and coaching to people who want to be successful in the indie game industry. So head on over to Patreon and you can take a look at my coaching tier, where I can coach you to become a better indie game developer, finish your game, and maybe even help you art direct and figure out how to make your game perfect, and that you can follow through, take the next steps to ensure that you're going to make an incredible indie game. All right guys, thanks so much. I'll see you later. Bye.